Hello, everyone. I hope you guys learned some interesting things from the vocabulary assignment yesterday on World War II. And today we're just going to go through a brief PowerPoint presentation on some of the things that happened during World War II. Our learning objective for today I will learn and discuss the events that occurred before, during, and after World War II, so I can understand the different leaders and countries involved during this time period. I know I have it when I can have multiple conversations with loved ones about the struggles during the mid 1900s. And here are just a few quick facts of about World War II. The first one being the war costs. So the U.S. debt in 1940 was 9 billion, and the U.S. debt in 1945 rose all the way up to 98 billion. That was toward the end of the war. So the war cost 330 billion, 10 times the cost of World War One, and as much as all previous federal spending since 1776. Now, 1776, I know you guys have seen that date before. If you think back to the lesson we had on the Twin Towers, 9/11, 1776 is the exact height of the Freedom Tower, which is in New York City. It's also the date of independence. Okay, now B, human costs. So 50 million people died compared to 15 million in World War One. 21.3 million were Russians. 7.8 of those 21.3 million were civilians, so people that was not affiliated with the military at all. And then 11 million died as a result of the Holocaust. 6 million were Jews, and 5 million were other races, nationalities. And here's a brief timeline of what happened during this time period. The first thing is in 1939, September 1st, Germany invades Poland, which was the official start of the war. The second thing being September 3rd, in that same year, Britain and France declare a war on Germany. 1941, December 7th, Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, which was located in Hawaii, and that's where the U.S. military, the Navy, had all their ships and everything. So 1945, the Germans surrendered in the war. In September of 1945, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is when the Japanese army surrendered. All right, so who was involved in the war at this time? So we have allies and we have the Axis. So ally, which is a state formally cooperating with another for a military or other purpose. Axis is the complete opposite. The allies of World War II were the countries that fought against the Axis powers during the conflict. The Axis powers were the nations that fought in World War II against the Allies. So the Allies at this time were Great Britain, Russia, the United States, and France. France surrendered to Germany in 1940. They fought roughly for about 6 weeks. And then we have the Axis power, which is Germany, Italy, and Japan. All right, so some of the major leaders during this time frame. So we have Hideki Toho, which was the Japanese prime minister. And we also have Winston Churchill, who was the British prime minister. So just a little bit about these guys. Hideki Toho was born in 1884, died in 1948. So he was the soldier and statesman who was prime minister of Japan during most of the Pacific theater portion of World War II, and who was subsequently tried and executed for war crimes. And then we have Winston Churchill, who was born in 1874 and died in 1965. He was a British statesman, orator, and author who was the prime minister as well. And he rallied the British people during World War II and led his country from the brink of defeat to victory. Some other major leaders, we have the Russian leader, which was Joseph Stalin. We also have Franklin Roosevelt. So Joseph Stalin was the Russian. He was a Russian born in 1878, and he died in 1953. He was Secretary General of Communist Party of the Soviet Union and premier of the Soviet state, who for a quarter of a century dictatorially ruled the Soviet Union and transformed it into a major world power. And Franklin D. Roosevelt. Most of you guys have heard this name before. I'm sure you have. He was a U.S. president. He was born in 1882, died in 1945. He was the 32nd president of the United States, and he is the only president that was elected 4 times. In doing so, he greatly expanded the powers of the federal government through a series of programs and reforms known as the New Deal, and he served as the principal architect of successful effort to rid the world of German National Socialism and Japanese militarism. All right, so let's talk about the beginning. So there are 4 main causes that started the World War II, and one of them was failure of the Treaty of Versailles, economic factors, nationalism, and appeasement and isolationism. So the death of destruction of World War I was so horrible that it was called the war to end all wars. Yet the agreement of the end of World War I did not resolve the problems of the world. According to some historians, that's what kind of led into World War II. The major causes of the World War II were numerous. They include the impact of the Treaty of Versailles following World War I, the worldwide economic depression, failure of appeasement, and the rise of militarism in Germany and Japan, and the failure of League of Nations. All right, so the failure of treaty in the Versailles. Following World War I, the victorious Allied powers met to decide Germany's future. Germany would be forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Germany had to accept guilt for the war and to pay reparations. Germany lost territory and was prohibited from having a large military. Again, so we have Germany lost land to surrounding nations and wanted them back. War guilt clause was Germany forced to pay 57 trillion. These payments bankrupted the German economy and left them hopeless and embarrassed. Then C, the U.S. Congress rejected the treaty, which again, the Germans was embarrassed. All right, number 2, the economic factors. The Depression made Germany's debt even worse. They were desperate people who turned to leaders to make them feel better about themselves and to put blame on others. In this case, Hitler blamed the former government, Jews, foreigners, communists, Roma, which was gypsies, the mentally ill, and homosexuals. And C, similar situations existed in other countries such as Italy. So the whole world was hit by an economic depression in the late 1920s. In the depression, economies shrink, trade is reduced, businesses close, prices fall, banks fail, and unemployment rises. Sometimes during the depression, people look for strong political leaders to resolve their problems. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became the leader of Germany by promising to restore German wealth and power. Then we have nationalism. Extreme nationalism gave rise to fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany and caused Japan to colonize with Asia. It is an extreme form of having pride in one's country. It creates a situation in which people think my country and people are the best. We deserve the best and we're going to take it from you. Then we have C, the support of nationalism. Countries increase their military strength to get what they want. So in the years following the Great World War I, Germany faced many obstacles. The country was poverty-stricken and had high levels of debt. The country was forced into a treaty that is still debated to be unfair. The Treaty of Versailles took away 13.5% of its territory, and it was ceded to create new countries like Poland and expand existing ones such as Denmark and France. Worst of all, Germany was forced into paying reparations for the war, a debt that was recently paid off in 2010, so not that long ago. This is what led to the Nazi era in Germany. Then we have number 4, appeasement and isolations. I'm sorry, this took so long for me to get it to open, but appeasement meant agreeing to the demands of another nation in order to avoid conflict. So during the 1930s, politicians in Britain and France began to believe that the Treaty of Versailles was unfair to Germany and that Hitler's actions were understandable and justifiable. This belief, adopted by Britain, was the policy of appeasement. An example of appeasement was the Munich Agreement in of September 1938. In the agreement, Britain and France allowed Germany to annex areas in Czechoslovakia where German speakers live. Germany agreed not to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia or any other country. So in March 1939, Germany broke its promise and invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. Neither Britain nor France was prepared to take military action. So on September 1st, 1939, German troops invaded Poland. Britain and France immediately declared war on Germany, and World War II had begun. All right, so the rise of the totalitarian regimes. And there we go. So people were forced to do what the government tells them, prevent from leaving country. People seeks control, not only all economic and political matters, but the attitudes, values, and beliefs of its population. This is a country with one political party. Soviet Union under Stalin, Nazi Germany, and People's of the Republic of China are reaching a system or rule of government dictator, a ruler who assumes full and absolute power. What is a monarchy, which is ruling by a king or queen. So in a totalitarian country, individual rights were not viewed as important as the needs of the nation. The government controls every aspect of the public and private life. All right, just a little bit about Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler peacefully annexed, which means he took over Austria in 1938. Hitler signed a non-aggressional pact with the USSR. They agreed not to fight each other and split Poland between them. Hitler would later break the pact and attack the USSR. The USSR then became one of the allies fighting Germany. So Adolf Hitler was the leader of the Germany's Nazi Party, was one of the most powerful and notorious dictators of the 20th century. Hitler capitalized on economic woes, popular discontent, and political fighting to take absolute power in Germany in 1933. Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 led to the outbreak of World War II. And by 1941, Nazi forces had occupied much of Europe. Hitler's virulent anti-Semitism and obsessive pursuit of Aryan supremacy fueled the murder of some 6 million Jews, along with other victims of the Holocaust. After the tide of war turned against him, Hitler committed suicide in a Berlin bunker in April of 1945. So how did Hitler make war? Oh, sorry about that, went too far. So in the next year, Hitler invades Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, and France. So in March 1936, against the advice of his generals, Hitler ordered German troops to reoccupy the demilitarized, I'm sorry if I messed that up, left bank of the Rhine. So over the next 2 years, Germany concluded alliances with Italy and Japan, annexed Austria, and moved against Czechoslovakia, all essentially without resistance from Great Britain, France, or the rest of the international community. So once he confirmed the alliance with Italy in the so-called Pact of Steel in May of 1939, Hitler then signed a non-aggressional pact with the Soviet Union. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi troops invaded Poland, finally prompting Britain and France to declare war on Germany. All right, so what is a Lend-Lease? All right, the Lend-Lease Act stated that the US government could lend or lease rather than sell war supplies to any nation deemed vital to the defense of the United States. Under this policy, the United States was able to supply military aid to its foreign allies during World War II while still remaining officially neutral in the conflict. Most importantly, passage of the Lend-Lease Act enabled a struggling Great Britain to continue fighting against Germany virtually on its own until the United States enters World War II in 1941. All right, so 1941, Pearl Harbor, a date which will live in infamy. So what happened was that there was a surprise attack by the Japanese on American forces in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Effect, the U.S. declares war on Japan and other Axis powers. So Pearl Harbor is a U.S. naval base near Honolulu, Hawaii, that was the scene of a devastating surprise attack by Japanese forces on December 7th, 1941. So just before 8 a.m. on that Sunday morning, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes descended on the base where they managed to destroy or damage nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 battleships and over 300 airplanes. So more than 2,400 Americans died in the attack, including civilians, and another 1,000 people were wounded. The day after the assault, President Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. All right, so and here is the ending. The war ended in 1945. World War II ended with the unconditional surrender of the Axis powers. On May 8, 1945, the Allies accepted Germany's surrender about a week after Adolf Hitler had committed suicide. Also on May 8th in 1945, Winston Churchill announced VE Day, which is victory in Europe. This day marks the end of World War II in Europe. So during this time, there were street parties held all over Britain to celebrate the end of war. But even though the war was officially at the end, there were still other things going on where more lives was claimed. So Japan did not surrender at the time as Germany. It was able to hold out for another few months. Atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th. After that, the imperial government sought the emperor's personal authority to surrender, which he granted. He made a personal radio address announcing the decision. So on August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered to the Allies, and it was known as the VJ Day, Victory in Japan. So September 2nd of 1945, having agreed in principle to unconditional surrender, Japan formally surrenders, ending World War II throughout the rest of the world. The surrender was signed on September 2nd, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. And that is the end of our lesson for today, guys. What did we learn? We learned and discussed the events that occurred before, during, and after World War II. So I could understand the different leaders and countries involved during this time period. I know I have it because I can have multiple conversations with loved ones about the struggles during the mid-1900s. Have a good day, everyone.